The rain hammered down in heavy sheets, drumming against the cracked asphalt of a lonely highway. The distant rumble of thunder echoed across the darkened sky, lightning slashing through the clouds for a brief, blinding moment. A lone car sped down the empty road, its headlights cutting through the storm. Inside, Claire Lawson kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near her phone. She was calm, focused, but always aware of her surroundings. Years of training had ingrained that into her. She had spent the past few days on leave, enjoying a rare break from duty. Being a Delta Force commander meant constant deployments, classified missions, and a life lived in the shadows. But tonight, she was just another traveler heading home, dressed in casual jeans and a jacket, blending into the world around her. No one looking at her would suspect she was one of the deadliest operatives in the world. Ahead, a set of flashing hazard lights pierced the darkness. A van sat on the shoulder, angled awkwardly as if it had swerved off the road. Two figures stood beside it, waving their arms, drenched in rain. Most people wouldn't stop. It was late, the storm was fierce, and the world was dangerous. But Claire wasn't most people. She slowed her car, rolling down the window slightly. "You guys need help?" She called over the rain point. One of the men stepped closer, his face partially hidden by the shadows. "Yeah, our van broke down. Engine just cut out on us." His voice was rough, urgent. The other man shifted uncomfortably, glancing down. The road. Claire's instincts flared, warning her that something felt off. But before she could react, she caught the briefest flicker of movement from the corner of her eye. Too late, a third man lunged from the darkness. The door was yanked open, hands grabbed at her, rough and forceful. Claire moved instantly, training taking over. She twisted, elbow driving into one man's ribs. A grunt of pain. She reached for the door handle, ready to push off and fight, but something cold and metallic pressed against her temple. "A gun." "Don't." The man snarled. For the first time in years, Claire let herself do something she rarely allowed. She played along. She let her body go still, raising her hands slowly. To them, she was just an ordinary woman, caught off guard, helpless, a civilian. They had no idea who they had just taken. The men shoved her into the van, slamming the doors shut behind her. The tires spun against the wet pavement as the vehicle roared back onto the highway, vanishing into the storm. Claire sat silently, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior. Three men, rough-looking, desperate, dangerous. Ex-prisoners, she guessed, judging by the crude tattoos and the way they carried themselves. She could hear their excited voices, arguing up front. "You sure she's alone? No one's gonna come looking for her?" "Nah, just some woman traveling solo. Easy target." Claire smiled to herself, barely noticeable in the darkness. They had no idea that they had just kidnapped the last person on Earth they should have messed with. The van rattled as it sped down the highway, the rain drumming against the roof. Inside, Claire kept her breathing steady, her body relaxed but her mind sharp. She sat with her back against the cold metal wall, her hands resting loosely on her lap. She wasn't tied up. They hadn't restrained her. That was their first mistake. The men up front continued talking, their voices hushed but urgent. "What are we gonna do with her?" one of them muttered. "Same as before. Keep moving, find a place to lie low," the driver replied. His grip on the wheel was tense, his knuckles white. He was nervous. "She's seen our faces." A pause. Claire could feel their hesitation. The one in the passenger seat turned slightly, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She could tell he was trying to figure her out. Just some woman, right? A traveler in the wrong place at the wrong time? But there was something in her eyes that unsettled him. He turned back quickly. "Doesn't matter," the driver said. "We'll deal with it when we get where we're going." Claire silently noted every detail. The way they carried themselves, their accents, the scars on their hands. These weren't just random criminals. They were ex-convicts, sure, but there was something more. Something desperate. They weren't thinking ahead. They had no plan. That meant they were running from something. The man sitting closest to her shifted, adjusting the gun in his lap. He was the youngest of the three, probably late 20s, his face hard but not as weathered as the others. He kept sneaking glances at her, like he was expecting her to beg, to panic. Claire did nothing. The silence stretched between them. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "You're real quiet," he muttered. Claire blinked at him, tilting her head slightly. "Should I be screaming?" He hesitated, like he hadn't expected her to respond that way. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Most people would be." "I'm not most people." The words hung in the air. The older man, the one in the passenger seat, scoffed. "She's trying to act tough," he muttered, shaking his head. Claire just smiled. She could feel the tension growing, the uncertainty. They had grabbed her thinking she was an easy target, but now they were starting to wonder if they had made a mistake. Good. The van swerved slightly as they hit a pothole, and Claire used the movement to subtly shift her posture. She wasn't just sitting anymore. She was positioning, mapping out her options, the layout of the van, the weapons, the distance between her and them. She could end this right now, but she didn't. Not yet. She needed to know more. "Where are we going?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. The youngest man scoffed. "Like we're gonna tell you." "Just curious." Silence. Claire let a small smile tug at the corner of her lips. "You're not very organized, are you?" That got a reaction. The older man snapped his head toward her, his expression darkening. "You got a death wish, lady?" Claire held his gaze. "No, but you might." A muscle in his jaw twitched. He was trying to intimidate her, but Claire wasn't easily shaken. She had faced worse. Much worse, the driver sighed. "Enough," he muttered. "Just keep her quiet until we stop." Claire leaned back against the van wall, letting the conversation drop. She could afford to wait. They were already unraveling, their nerves showing through every decision they made. She glanced at the youngest one again. He was still watching her, his grip on the gun tightening slightly. He was the weakest link. Not because he was less dangerous. He was probably just as ruthless as the others, but because he was unsure, and doubt was a powerful weapon. She would use it when the time was right. The van took a sharp turn, the tires splashing through deep puddles. The lights of the highway faded, swallowed by darkness as they veered onto a smaller, less traveled road. A back road, away from prying eyes. Claire exhaled slowly. Wherever they were going, it wasn't good. But for them, it was going to be much, much worse. The van rumbled down the narrow road, the wet gravel crunching beneath its tires. The heavy rain had eased into a steady drizzle, mist curling along the edges of the road where thick trees pressed in from both sides. The air inside the vehicle was tense, thick with unspoken thoughts. Claire sat motionless, her mind racing even as she kept her expression calm. Every bump in the road, every flicker of movement from the men, every shift in their body. Language. She absorbed it all. The youngest of the three kept fidgeting, tapping his fingers against the side of his gun. He wasn't used to situations like this. He liked the idea of being dangerous, but wasn't built for it. The older one, Claire pegged him as their leader, was quieter, his mind running through calculations, trying to figure out what to do next. The driver stayed focused on the road, occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror, stealing quick looks at Claire. They still didn't know who she was. That was working in her favor. The van slowed as they reached a clearing, a small, abandoned gas station barely visible through the trees. The faded sign above the empty lot flickered dimly, its neon letters broken and unreadable. The place was long forgotten, perfect for men who didn't want to be seen. The driver pulled the van around. The side, where the station's metal garage door hung partially open, leading into darkness. The rain dripped steadily off the rusting awning as the men climbed out, motioning for Claire to follow. She stepped down, her boots crunching against the wet pavement. The air smelled of damp earth and old oil. The leader, a tall man with deep lines in his face, gestured toward the station. Inside, Claire didn't hesitate. She walked ahead, feeling the eyes on her back, their movements cautious. They were still unsure about her. Something about the way she carried herself didn't fit their expectations. Good. Inside, the place was exactly what she expected. Dusty shelves, broken lights, a register left abandoned. A few overturned chairs sat near the far wall, a grimy window giving a warped view of the outside. The leader motioned toward one of the chairs. Sit. Claire sat. She let them think they were in control. The youngest one paced, his anxiety creeping into every movement. Look, man, we need to figure this out. She's a problem. The leader sighed, rubbing his temples. We can't leave her out here, and we can't keep moving with her in the van. We need to lay low, wait for things to calm down. Claire tilted her head slightly. What exactly are you running from? The leader narrowed his eyes at her. None of your business. Claire smiled. It kind of is now. The youngest one scoffed. Why are you so calm? She shrugged. Why are you so nervous? He stiffened. The leader gave him a sharp look. Knock it off. Claire leaned back, watching them. She had her answer now. They weren't just escaped prisoners. They were running from something else. Maybe someone else. Law enforcement? A rival group? Someone had forced them into this desperate move that made them even more dangerous. The driver finally spoke, his voice low. We can't stay here long. Too exposed. The leader nodded. Then we keep her here while we figure things out, just until we know it's safe. Claire didn't react, even as she felt the tension shift. They thought she was something to deal with later, a problem to put on hold. They had no idea that their problem was about to get a lot worse. The youngest one glanced between them. You sure about this? What if she tries something? The leader sighed. Then she won't be a problem anymore. Claire met his eyes, unflinching. He expected fear. He found none. He frowned. Something about her wasn't adding up. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm hadn't fully passed. The wind howled through the broken windows, rattling loose pieces of metal along the walls. The driver checked his watch, then nodded toward the door. I'll keep an eye out. The leader exhaled, rubbing his jaw. Get some rest. We'll move at first light. Claire said nothing. She just smiled slightly. They thought they had time. They didn't.